Or you can stand up with me if you want. I stand the whole time. I told the early service that too. I don't mind if you want to come stand with me. I don't mind. Actually, some little ones might take me up on that, so let's not say that. I'm grateful for all the teachers who teach some of my kids and some of your kids. They do an incredible job. And right now there's a group down there taking care and teaching some kids about Jesus, and grateful for them. Sometimes in our assembly, I know people, so especially if you're older, you think like, it gets loud in here. These kids are loud. And I'd rather have loud kids than no kids, and I'll take every small voice among us, and even when they are not always on their best behavior, as some of you parents may think, grateful that they're here. And if you parents are bringing your little ones, and maybe they're not so little, maybe they're teenagers, and they think like, I don't want to be here and this is boring, keep bringing them. This little guy here who grew up, I didn't always love to brush my teeth or eat my vegetables or go to bed early or do my homework or go to school or go to church. And today I'm grateful for all of it. So keep bringing them. Sorry. And even if you're a mom who wrestles with kids, and you think like, I didn't hear a thing today. I mean, totally useless today. Keep bringing them. And even when you don't get a lot out of it, it was good to be here. And I hope you know that in the long term, even if the day is hard. It's a good church. And glad you're here. Whatever brought you here, grateful you're here. Hope it's a good day for you. At the end of the last chapter that we looked at, chapter 19 of Matthew, you can turn there or pull out your device and find it. Jesus says, many who are first will be last, many who are last will be first. And just as he says that, then he launches into this new parable. Here's another story. Here's another lesson to learn. So listen to this. Chapter 20, Matthew chapter 20, starting verse 1. It's long, but listen. For the kingdom of heaven is like a landowner who went out early in the morning to hire workers for his vineyard. He agreed to pay them a denarius for the day and sent them into his vineyard. About 9 in the morning, he went out and saw others standing in the marketplace doing nothing. He told them, you also go and work in my vineyard, and I will pay you whatever is right. So they went. He went out again about noon and about 3 in the afternoon and did the same thing. About 5 in the afternoon, he went out and found still others standing around. He asked them, why have you been standing here all day doing nothing? Because no one's hired us, they said. He said to them, you also go, you work in my vineyard. When evening came, the owner of the vineyard said to the foreman, call the workers and pay them their wages, beginning with the last ones hired and going on to the first. The workers who were hired about 5 in the afternoon came, and each received a denarius. So when those came who were hired first, they expected to receive more, but each of them also received a denarius. When they received it, they began to grumble against the landowner. These who were hired last worked only 1 hour, they said, and you've made them equal to us who have borne the burden of the work and the heat of the day. But he answered one of them, I'm not being unfair to you, friend. Didn't you agree to work for a denarius? Take your pay and go. I want to give the one who was hired last the same as I gave you, and don't I have the right to do what I want with my own money? Or are you envious because I am generous? So, the last will be first and the first will be last. Interesting, this parable set between these two bookends that couch it together and say the very same thing, maybe a little bit different, but it's the same thing. The nature of the kingdom of heaven is like this. Last will be first, first will be last. The question is, do you understand that? But maybe a tougher question is, do you like that? Is that fair? You can tell how far removed we are from that culture, from that time, because if somebody's looking for work or somebody is looking for workers, you hardly have to go anywhere these days. You just get online on ZipRecruiter or Monster or Indeed. If you want to go somewhere, you can go to a local office of PenMac or Staffing Plus or Missouri Career Center. But so much of our time these days on matching workers and people who need workers is online. It's hardly ever face-to-face. It may be a little bit on a phone, but you don't have to sit across the desk from somebody. And more than likely, if it's a big established company, you'll never meet the owner. But in those days, If you needed work, you went to where workers would go and congregate for the day, just waiting for somebody to come and say, I need you, come work for me. And for your family's sake back home who needed to eat, you needed to work. It was wonderful, and especially at the busy time of year like this, harvest time. You get up early, you get there, the early bird gets the worm, so you get there, you get to town, you get in the marketplace, and that's where others have gathered, and that's where the man comes. That's where the folks come, and they say, you, and you, come after me. Let's go work. They need you, you need them. They negotiate, work it out, what's going to be paid for what work. You agree and you get to work, and that's how it happens, and it plays out just like that. But it didn't stop at the beginning of the story where, of course, that happens, and stop, period, end of story, because it gets all mixed up when the job is not so unexpected, but the pay is. He keeps going back and bringing more, and that sounds good until you start paying people who came later in the day. And by the end of the day, the sun is set now. It's time for the owner to pay him. He says to his right-hand man, his foreman, get them together and start paying them. But pay the last ones first and the first ones last. And it happened just like that. So the last ones to arrive start getting their money put in their hand, and they seem pleased. Of course they would be, wouldn't they? The coin for a whole day's wage lands in their hand. They must put it in their pocket, in their pouch. They're headed off, and isn't that wonderful? But it's not so wonderful because the first ones to arrive also discover that they are getting what the first guys who were the last guys got, and it all becomes not so much frustrating as to understand it, frustrating as to understand why this happened. The first guys who got there had agreed on the amount, so anybody with a sense of fairness should know that even if that was the amount that was promised, once you start seeing those guys who came late get the same amount, you would think that I should get more. It's only fair. That's where the grumbling begins. And you can see Jesus poking the bear. Jesus has set up the scenario. He's told the story just to get them thinking and maybe get them frustrated. You can imagine, as Robertson says it, there wouldn't be any tension if he just paid the first people first. So here they come, put a coin in their hand, they close it, they put it in their pouch or their pocket, they walk out the door and they're gone. And the next guy comes and he says, well, that's generous. The next guy, that's really generous. The final, that's really, really generous. But no issue, no problem. But this is why Jesus paints this picture. He wants the finger to be pointed at that group who has a problem. Watch them, listen to them. Watch them, listen to them whine, and you start seeing what Jesus is getting at. Now, personally, I think, as others have pointed out, I think we might also have issue with this. Do you have a problem? If people come at different times and do different work, and some barely work and others work their tails off and still both get paid, don't alarms in your head go off? Even if it's a smaller deal than a great injustice in the world, don't you say, wait, something isn't right here. That's not fair. I know we all want to be thought of as equals. Everybody wants to be equal, treated equally, seen equally, respected equally. We love the thought. We love the thought of God treating all of us equally, in every way equal, unless something like this happens. All of a sudden, deep down, honestly, we don't like it at all. There's a part of us that feels for those early workers as they got fired up, so might we. Everything's kosher, everything's good until the pay starts coming. Then the claws come out, then the fangs are shown, then the venom is spewed. And listen to them. Oh, you, sir, have made them equal with us. Equal. Us. We who have borne the burden of the day. We who have worked the hardest and longest. We who have endured the heat on our heads. We who are dripping with sweat. We are not equal with them. And you know what? They're not wrong, are they? It's a fair statement. It's not fair, but it's a fair statement. We did the bulk of the work. We endured the sun. We worked hardest. We worked longest. You have not treated us fairly. How is that fair? Now, they don't have an issue with the money so much. They agreed to work for that money. It's not with the work. They did the same work that they agreed to do. They have an issue with fairness, more pointedly with the boss, with the landowner, with the one in charge. They don't like him right now. It's as if they're saying, if you, sir, cannot see what we see, that there is a difference among us, between us and them, if you can't tell that there's something wrong here, that we would do things differently if we were in charge, then, sir, you don't understand what is fair and what is right. And all of a sudden, the workers at the bottom, who are just workers, have raised themselves up in their own heads and hearts to where they should be owning this. They know what is right and what is best and what is fair. They can do it better than him. They should be running the show. The wrong one is in charge. And the pride and the arrogance bubbles up, and God is great if he is generous, as long as he is generous first with us. It's great if he is fair, as long as we get to define what fair is. So in some ways, this parable starts with the sovereignty of God. And even before we answer whether this is fair, we should answer, is God sovereign? Is he God? Is he the landowner? Is he the king? Is this his vineyard? Is this his money? Can he do what he wants in his kingdom if he is in charge? If we put ourselves in God's place, then I think we would like to be the landowner, and we have a thing to say to these punks who have come now telling us what to do. And so we think now, let's put ourselves in God's place, and I think it's time for a good spanking, maybe a good rebuke, a reprimand, a riveting come to Jesus sermon. And after this sermon, we'll have an invitation song, and you can come and tell us how you were wrong. We'd like to point a finger at those guys, say, sit down and shut up for a moment, let me talk, I'm in charge kind of attitude. But listen to what the landowner says, and listen to how he says it, I think. I'm not being unfair to you, friend. Even when the Lord has to rebuke and explain, even when we disagree, and rightly so, we think, even when we stand against him, we figure we are right, and he is really too kind, too good, too generous, too gracious. Still, he treats us like friends with a gentle correction. He didn't cheat them who grumbled. He did them no wrong. This was right because he gets to choose. Their issue was that he was too generous to those who did not work all day and still got what they got. And he has to say to them, did you notice that? Take what I paid you. Why would he have to say that? I don't know, but maybe they've left it on the table. The coin is still sitting on the table. Maybe by now the coin he put in their hand, they've thrown it across the room. I don't know, but it apparently says they're frustrated and mad. It's possible the money they wanted at the beginning of the day, they now are about to refuse. Based on principle alone. If you know the scriptures, your mind may go to what Jesus said in Luke's gospel, another parable where there is an older brother who does not like his wasteful, prodigal younger brother, the son of my father. He throws a conniption fit too. You can see him folding his arms, shaking his finger. Not as so much the son that he despises, but the father that he totally disagrees with. Once we start comparing ourselves with others, that's where the frustration begins. That's where we want to make a point. This, sir, is not fair. And maybe this is our human nature. Maybe there's something within us where even we, sitting in church on a Sunday morning, may be wondering about this. It doesn't come out much. We don't say it publicly very often. It would make us look bad. But are there times when we have to take a stand? We have to point out a problem. We might need to throw a fit and rebuke even God himself. Even the God of grace who made it and owns it and sovereignly rules it. But we take issue with him because right now this, sir, is not fair. Sometimes we point out the problem to the one who has shown grace. We get grace, we like generosity, but not to him and not to her and certainly not to them. Makes you wonder what God really sees and what he knows. If he is ruler of his whole kingdom, then maybe he sees what we do not. McGee imagines this scenario of a sweet little lady from their church, and one day he gets to see her go to her reward, and he gets to see the Lord put in her hands the reward, and it is generous and it's wonderful. And he imagines himself standing there next to another leader in the church and says, "Who is that really? Seriously, I don't know her. She goes to our church." "Yes, but I mean, who is she? I mean, what has she done?" And the two of them start thinking of all the things she hasn't done in church. Oh, part of the church, but has done very little. But they don't know that she has done what she can, and she has by herself, on her own, as a single woman without a husband, raised her child well and raised him to know the Lord and serve the Lord. And that little boy grows up to be a great missionary for Jesus. So you don't have to know her well. You don't have to list all the things she doesn't do in your church or value her differently than you would others. She is being faithful to God in the way she can with all she has. And for God, that's enough. God knows. God rewards. God is in charge. McGee says it's not the amount of time which you serve, nor the prominence or importance of your position which determines your reward. Rather, you will be rewarded for faithfulness to the task which God has given you to do, regardless of how small or how short or how insignificant it appears. I think we're hearing what Jesus is getting at here, but let me give you some things to chew on as you go home. First, if this parable is about the ugly stuff that can sometimes be within us in our hearts, it often starts with the comparison game. And I suspect you know it because I have played it too. Have you? The guys who came at the beginning of the day are okay with the work and okay with the pay until they discover they are not being treated like everybody else. Everything's great until the money starts being laid down, and then it all becomes unfair. And the comparisons always bring frustration. It's just how it happens. And don't think you're all that great, because even the apostles who were great did it too. In John 21, Jesus is telling Peter some things Peter doesn't want to hear. And on the way down the path by the sea after breakfast, he tells him some things, and Peter says, "Hey, there's John. What about him?" And Jesus says, "Don't worry about him. You follow me. You follow me." Maybe we just need to stop comparing to each other and just follow Jesus. Number two, if this is a lesson that we've learned before, then it's still true, even if you've heard it 100 times before. If this is about a Christian who serves well and serves long, and all of his or her life they have been forgiving and living and sacrificing and giving everything just so they could honor the Lord in what they did, then all of a sudden, here comes late in life some Johnny-come-lately, some deathbed confession, some baptism at the 11th hour, some "I think I've got cancer and I might die," and here all of a sudden he wants to be part of the kingdom? Do we really expect God to forgive him and save her and allow them in just because at the very end of the day they waltz in? Well, yes. Yes, how else could we see it but yes? Third, if this is about that first group that got paid last, then I think we should focus on them. There's something about that group that's special because it's not very special or sweet. If they're representing the Jews, then there's good reason why the Jews needed to pay attention to these Gentiles and other riffraff coming into the kingdom because they thought they deserved to be in the kingdom. I get it. But even if it's not about Jews and maybe more about disciples, apostles, or saints, I think we need to pay attention to that last group. Because that last group that was chosen but paid first were not all that impressive, as Card might say, hardly an inspiring bunch. If people were standing there ready to work in the marketplace, and here comes a man and says, "Hey, come with me, you, and you." Then comes later on in the day and says, "Now out of the same grape, you, and you too also." And finally, by the last, who's left? They were perhaps, as Wright says, the sort of people everybody tried hard not to hire. Did these guys even get there on time? Are they lazy? Are they scrawny? Are they undesirable? It's like the ones being picked for dodgeball or kickball on the playground or in the gym. How embarrassing for them to pick the strong one and the fast one and the good-looking one and the tall one and the one who's played all of his life or her life, and then you're left with what you're left with for good reason, like, oh boy, I guess I have to take you. But here comes this man, even at the very end of the day, and says, I want you and you and you. Come with me. Let's go work. I don't know what the reputation was. I don't know what they represent. I don't know if they were good workers or not. It almost doesn't matter. He picked them. He picked them. And he put them to work in his vineyard. And here we are, I think. Here we are. I don't know what you think of yourself, but when it comes to holiness and righteousness and goodness and perfection, I know why some might want to pick me last. I know some consider me, us, unworthy. I know why at the end of the day, maybe some of us are still standing there. And the Lord still comes and says, yes, I want you, come work for me. And no matter what has happened before, no matter who was picked first, I get the honor of serving too. He uses me. He pays me. He rewards me. He thinks I'm worthy of the work. Card says this is what hesed love is, the love and grace of God. And it's what, well, he says, it's when the person from whom I have a right to expect nothing gives me everything. That's that kind of love. That's that kind of God. The last are paid first, the first are paid first are paid last. In the story, not so much I think about the sequence of payment, but understanding of the gift itself. Some love this hesed kind of love, and some hate it and can't stand the Lord for showing it. This brings us to another part of the parable, I think, that's maybe the biggest point of the parable. It's about God. I think this parable is about God. Is God unfair? Well, you have to answer that. Is He too generous? You have to answer that. No matter what you think or feel, know, believe, you have to answer. Does God have a right to do as He pleases? Does He have a right? We wonder and question and challenge and criticize and complain, but if He is God, He does what He chooses. He is sovereign. And then there's another side point of the parable that may not be so side point and maybe one of the main points. Maybe you've thought about this parable as getting salvation at the end of life. Maybe you've thought of it as a system of rewards, but maybe it's not about salvation, which we can't earn, or so much about rewards, which we shouldn't work for anyway. It's really maybe about what Peter has just said. Did you notice what Peter said last week? The rich man left. He couldn't follow Jesus. He was too rich. And here's too poor Peter, who says, Jesus, we've given up everything. Given up everything. What will be there for us? And Jesus tells him a story. Jesus can't leave it there. He has to teach Peter and the other apostles a lesson. Learn it, fellas, learn it. Because the first will be last, last will be first. Life is not about what you think sometimes. Life and service in the kingdom is not about what you get in the end. It is just about the honor of serving in the kingdom in the first place and letting God be God. Jesus pushes Peter and the apostles to do a little self-reflecting. Have you noticed them already comparing some things like, oh, who's the greatest in the kingdom? And later on, will they still be keeping score after they have come into this so early? And here come the late guys coming into the kingdom like they own it. Maybe Jesus is nipping it in the bud early. Maybe He's pruning them before it starts to grow. Because ministry in the kingdom can be really, really frustrating. And maybe it can make you think this is a grind. This is a burden. This is a chore. And it may make you bitter and angry and comparative and judgmental and nitpicky and critical, or it can make you just grateful that the Lord has called you to serve, to work, to labor in the kingdom in the first place. He'll take care of who is saved. He'll take care of the rewards. Their job is just to serve well with gratitude. So, church, No comparing. Comparing leads to criticism, so no comparing. And if resentment starts to build up, Hare says there's something that'll take care of it. Here's the solution. It is overcome by fixing our gaze on the goodness of God, who is generous to all. Wright says people who work in church circles can easily assume they're special. God's inner circle. While God is out in the marketplace looking for people everywhere, all these people who others have ignored, welcoming them with the same terms that we came, surprising them and everybody else with His generous grace. So I don't know how you see yourself in the story. If you're sitting in the marketplace wondering what this kingdom is about and if there's a place for you to serve and if there's any value that you could give in work, look around. Because God is looking for you, still saying, come work, come serve, come follow me. And if you have been serving a long time in the kingdom, most of your life, counting all of the things you have given up, make sure you are humble enough to know the honor of it all. John Newton once said, if I ever reach heaven, I expect to find 3 wonders there. First, to meet some I had not thought to see there. Second, to miss some I had expected to see there. And third, the greatest wonder of all, to find myself there. God is a generous God. Thank God He is God and generous. And the greatest wonder of all for me is how could He have loved me that much? Considered me, us worthy to know Him, to be used by Him, to be put in service in the kingdom. No more comparisons, church. Just overwhelming gratitude for a generous God who counts us worthy to serve in His kingdom. Let's stand and sing. Come if you need to.
I am a sheep and the Lord is my shepherd, watching over my soul to keep guarding over me ever, watching wherever